Right, we're live. Thanks everyone for being here. We'll give it a little bit more just to make sure so everyone can get in properly, and then we'll dive into it. Nabil, nice to see you as well.
Thank you. Thanks to you, Jack.
Perfect. I think we should be fine maybe to get started. So yeah, brilliant. Well, welcome everyone. Thank you for being here. Appreciate you taking the time. I know this is lunch for most of you in Europe, so thank you very much. And to everyone else joining us as well, thanks for being here. So first of all, welcome for navigating SAP GTS. So I think many of you will know we're going to be diving into some interesting topics, legal changes, compliance, trade preference, and also some stuff on the future of GTS as well. So my name's Jack from Trillion. I'm the head of the GTS practice here, and I'm also joined by Nabil. Nabil, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yes, thank you, Jack. So, hey, my name is Nabil. I'm a GTS consultant. So I've been implementing GTS for the last 10 years in various areas, which we will highlight today. So I'm very happy to be here and to be your host.
Perfect. Well, let's get going then.
Yes, perfect. Then I'll take the floor, if you agree, Jack, and we will start with showing you basically what will be presented and many the objectives of today's session.
Perfect.
So the agenda would be, after we did the introduction, we will tackle the key changes in the customs declarations because it's an important piece of the, let's say, GTS area. Then we will tackle over the compliance features when you use GTS and overall, because you have to accommodate to these requirements for different government agencies all over the world. Then lastly, I would say the last bucket of the main functionalities, high level from GTS would be the trade preference. Here we will tackle, let's say, the benefits of using GTS to handle this process. Then, of course, another would be more towards the future to see what SAP has been preparing for the last years, let's say, in regards to the progress of the technology. And we will end up with hopefully an interactive Q&A session. So please feel free to, during the session, to note down your questions and we can tackle them one by one during that time slot. And finally, we will close with some final remarks and next steps. Okay, then, so today, as said, Jack and I will be speaking. So Jack will also add some remarks during the session. I will lead, let's say, the topics that were presented in the agenda, and Jack will just interrupt me when you want to add any topic that is relevant. Okay, so I think by now the objective is quite clear. The purpose is that we will only tackle the GTS IT system, even though, of course, there are other systems in the global trade area like GTM, OneSource, and so on. But here it's not, the purpose is not really a comparison about the others, but really focusing on the, let's say, the advantages of GTS with regards to the latest legal changes and customs requirements. Okay, so first bucket, which is the, I would say, very interesting customs updates that are happening as we speak, or that, let's say, are planned for the next weeks. The first one would be that Poland is migrating to what we call the AES plus customs tool, let's say, or software. So meaning that, Poland is supported on the customs area, and they are planning this move. Actually, a lot of other countries plan to go on the AES system. So, for example, we have Sweden as well that planned this officially from the government agency, the government authority on 2nd of December. And they allowed, of course, let's say a window since October to do this transition. So basically just from a bit more details, they moved from TRD 050 to AES for the exports. Then we have Austria, same. Here they basically changed their connector to accommodate with the changes that customs allowed. We have as well some changes on the NCTS, so for the transit, for Belgium and Netherlands that are upcoming. UK or Great Britain, we also have some changes in the excise window, where basically they be technical, but so they move from the SOAP interface to what they call RESTful API for excise. We had some Atlas changes as well for the versions, if you're familiar to them. On the import, they moved to 10.1, which is currently happening. And on the export, we had the AES 3.0. Then on France, lastly, I would say there's also some expected NCTS Transit Phase 5.
I think it's important to note as well, I think, while the Atlas update's going on, I think Seaburger and the customs authorities are quite struggling with that one, actually. So I wonder if anyone has been delayed by that. I know, obviously, I think a few of the people in here will be consultants as well. So if you've experienced issues with Seaburger for Atlas, I think everyone knows how you're feeling. And that's been similar with Belgium as well. Recently has also done AES, customs authorities, and if anyone's done the Belgian project recently, they'll know there was a very large delay from the customs authorities. So I think everyone here will feel your pain as well.
Indeed. So thank you for that, Jack. And actually, I think after this slide, we will tackle the intermediate partners, so Seaburger. So, but as Jack said, it would be interesting to have your view, your challenges with Seaburger as intermediate partner, also because they're the only ones on the market for the supported countries with SAP. Okay, so then the next window would be the special customs procedure quickly. So GTS supports, of course, all these special customs procedures that we call, so bonded warehouse, free trade zones or FTZ, IPR, inward processing, the outward, so OPR, and as said earlier, the EMCS, so the excise. For those that are less familiar with these procedures, we added let's say the definition of them. So here again, if you also are using this, would be good to have your insights during the Q&A session, because I think these are always the ones where you, let's say, reduce your duties, cost, you try to have more cash flow and so on. So would be good to have your experience as well in your industry areas. So as said, the famous integration with Seaburger. So we said that SAP, of course, provides standard supported solution for countries in the customs area, but that integration also needs to be connected to Seaburger, because they basically translate your declarations to the authorities. And what is their job? Well, they provide the compliance, the technical flexibility, and secure data transfer when it comes to translating all these data elements. So overall, for those of you that are less aware of it, you have, of course, different filing options. So you can do e-filing electronically. You can do paper-based from your GTS system, but then you mail them, for example, outside of it, or you do a direct broker integration towards your broker.
I think it's worth noting as well on the points with the integration with Seaburger. I think if anyone was at the Global Trade Conference in Amsterdam last week, Christian Stadler, who's obviously the product manager within SAP for Global Trade, was mentioning the sort of new product that they're releasing with the customs connection, where I believe the plan is to sort of have Seaburger, built in to SAP and have it all in the same system rather than having that as a sort of external middleware. So they're going to bring that in rather than having a complete separate thing. But like Nabil was mentioning, obviously everyone knows Seaburger is really the only one on the market, so it makes sense that they're going to bring this in. But I thought it was worth mentioning is it's something that's a little bit new.
I think also one thing to mention, because between brackets we added on top in the title Pro Data, maybe less familiar, but so they also basically built that interface when it comes for Austria. So Austria, there was also quite some updates coming in, but there you have to connect with Pro Data. Okay, then let's move on to the next slide. So with all these changes in the customs area, of course, you can go and your business would know these changes in the customs environment, but you can also check what is upcoming on the SAP platform. So if you go to the legal changes and select the GTS component, you can also just track whatever legal change is upcoming. Yeah, and then as said, on the customs area, GTS supports all the import, export, and transit for these supported countries. Okay, then we can move on to the next module, and discussing directly how GTS solves the challenges, because here again, it would be very interesting to hear, because I can imagine that on the compliance, you have some interesting stories to share with us with regards to your clients and how they accommodate with the automation. When we say automation, meaning a system is in control, but how do you then meet the requirement of having a waterproof compliance process and overall? So I think GTS does a good job in that with the different areas. So first of all, it's a centralized compliance management, so you can use it for all your entities in the world. So which, for example, for a feeder system can be different. So you can have a feeder system for all the continents and actually still use one single GTS to accommodate all these continents, let's say. So that's, I think, an advantage of GTS because it can also be connected to multiple feeder systems. It's pretty automated, dependent on the config that you set up, even with the standard solution. It's real time, meaning so whenever a transaction is happening, there's a breakdown process that the system goes through, basically to tell if something needs to be blocked from the system point of view or not. There is a reduced IT dependency, let's say, because the business handles typically those compliance areas once the config is there and that everything is in production and live. So yeah, you remove, let's say, the dependency of IT to whatever add, like in your sanctioned party list screening, a word that is coming very often because of your industry. Let's say I don't know, you have a word that is seems to be used in quite some blacklist entities, but in your industry you also use it and it's common business language. Then you can also say to your system to remove this in your comparison, let's say.
Nabil, would you say recently that compliance has become maybe a bigger issue? Obviously, we have all the sanctions that get updated very often, Russia, things like this. I know obviously this would be more dependent on certain clients, but I imagine, you know, SPL screening and things like this there's probably been more of a focus on that recently, right? Have you felt that?
Yes, I have to say, with the years, it's always progressing. So compliance, I think one thing I noticed is that also from the penalties, let's say the fines are also becoming bigger, especially in the US. Maybe the other continents, countries will follow, especially as you said, with the recent Russia political conflicts and so on, Middle East as well. So I think GTS does a good job in providing a solution for that. even if you look at the historical setup of, for example, sanctioned party list screening, embargo screening, embargo is based on the country, but we saw with the years that you also have some regions actually that are in conflict and not really the country. So here again, you can tweak somehow the system in order to, for example, block those. So I think, as said, GTS is in that regards then a very handful tool to at least reduce the risk of having a fine, which can have a big impact on the let's say the client's business.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, then I would say the features, high level of the three areas. So we have SPL screening, which works basically on content. So here again, in this, you cannot really go live with it without a content provider. There's a lot of them. Just to name some, so you have Descartes, which I think is the biggest, but you have PST, you have Mendel, you have I think that's there's a couple ones additionally, but I think you know them. Would be good here to hear as well during the Q&A. What is your opinion about the different content providers?
Do you have a favorite one, Nabil? One that you prefer working with in terms of content providers, or?
Not really. I mean, from my perspective, I maybe saw when implementing the recent edition for HANA that Descartes had, let's say, the most advantage, like first movers advantage with the E4H, because they had to update some files, especially with the classification. So not really with the compliance SPL, but I saw with some material classification that XMLs needed to be updated from the content providers, and that Descartes was, let's say, the first pioneer to make these changes.
Okay, that's interesting, worth knowing. Obviously, I think everyone's going to know a lot about Edition 4 HANA coming up. That's the big topic, isn't it, right now?
Correct. Yes, indeed. So we can also tackle it briefly, mentioning this, that for current version 11 clients, I believe everyone is aware, but it will be end of maintenance in 2000. Yes.
End of next year, right?
Yes, correct. End of 2025, December. So by then you should be converted into this new version, which is called Edition for HANA, because SAP will not support previous version anymore.
Yeah, it's probably worth noting as well, just briefly on that point, is that you'll still be able to have customer-specific maintenance for version 11 after sort of the end of next year, but you won't have access to any legal changes like we've mentioned. For example, if Atlas is changing to another version, then you won't be able to have it, won't be supported on version 11. So the long and short of it is that by the end of next year, everyone needs to move, really.
Correct, yes. Especially, so as you said, the areas that require any updates because of the nature of it, like customs, then indeed you would miss those advantages of being on SAP, is that you don't have to accommodate with those changes, which is, I think, maybe a disadvantage with the competitors like a OneSource or whatever, because they accommodate, of course, but since it's less global, they probably have to first implement it with the first client, see how they personalize it, and then roll it out to the others.
Exactly. Well, let's continue with the compliance.
Yes, thank you, Jack. Then we have the embargo, as said a bit earlier. So here you make sure that your transactions going to embargoed countries are being blocked by the system and reviewed by your business. And lastly, we have the legal control, which typically in our area is used to accommodate to a lot of requirements. So the name legal control is a bit, I would say, broader in my point of view. That's why I also put in brackets the export, because you can also tweak it for import processes. So, I mean, for the consultants here in the call, they probably know it. You just use the legal control to meet the requirement of any business that would say require control. Okay, then as well, just the advantage of having the content providers is that you don't have to worry about the updates that are happening on a daily basis. For example, the sanctioned party list screening, I think every day there's a change. And so the content provider is responsible of that and provides you with the updated files, typically on an FTP or SFTP server, which you then have to load into the GTS system. So yeah, I mean, buying these, it depends from provider to content provider. I think all of them work with what they call packages. So you have packages per industry, per area, like they have specific Brazilian checks, specific Mexican, and so on. Also industry specific, let's say the army, so military, and so on. So I think here, I mean, obviously, the more you buy, the more SPL list you buy, the more potential hits you might have, because you're comparing your master data against more lists, which I think makes sense. And then on the setup of GTS, GTS allows you some flexibility with at least SPL screening for the algorithm. So in the new edition for HANA, you can still make use of the standard GTS search function algorithm, or go on the HANA, because previously for the HANA it was also available, but you had to be on the HANA database, which is different. So because on the GTS version 11 you could still be, for example, on Oracle database, but then the HANA would not fit towards that. And for the version 11 that are on T-Rex, this is not supported anymore on Edition for HANA. Okay, then I think lastly we can move to the last module, GTS, which is the one I would say is the one where the industry or your client saves duty. Because if you can show the eligibility regarding the agreement between two countries, you can just reduce or don't have to pay any duties for it. And also regarding your customers, if you can provide with, let's say, the blank statement to them, they can also when they import it from their side, not pay duties, which for you as a client shows the, let's say, the competitive advantages towards your competitors. So I think main concept would be that typically complexity lies within the rules of origin, which you buy. You can also, of course, configure them. I'm sure you know it, but usually they are bought because of the let's say, full logic that is behind between different methods that can be used, the classification that is linked to it, and so on. And you can buy them for the different agreements. I think this is also something that is growing with the years more and more. There's usually more continents changing businesses together. So that's why I think GTS is a good tool for that. Because I wouldn't even know, to be honest, how a client is keeping that up manually or with Excel. Because yeah, I think in my opinion, you would miss really a lot of cost reductions. So, and as well, the managing it of itself, I think even with Edition for HANA, SAP did quite some improvements on this. So they allowed, let's say, different handling of the various processes within the trade preference. So on the inbound, on the calculation, and on the outbound side. Now, having the GTS tool allows you as well to have accurate calculations dependent on the configuration that you have done. But that would be, I would say, the benefit of using a GTS tool. Especially, yeah, one thing that I think sometimes, and I think I only experienced it with one client, is that if you do some inaccurate calculation or preference statements to your orders, you also have fines. So because you're non-compliant and you're in your calculation, I mean, that's why you have all the logs that you have to show if that's happening, that how did you do your calculation, and based on what did you say that this is preferential or not.
Yeah, I think there's a noticeable shift, I think, of sort of importance for this. Like you mentioned, obviously it's essential for cost saving competitiveness. So I think it's really becoming a much bigger deal for a lot of clients. And like you say, if it's done wrong, then you're automatically, being faced with a penalty. So I think there's a lot of earners on this. I think recently, at least in my experience, I don't know if anyone who's in the webinar has felt that shift as well, or perhaps you, Nabil.
Yes, I think, obviously the trade preference would be the interesting one to discuss because it would only be applicable for clients that have a procurement process. So every production and so on, then it makes sense. But indeed, I think would be good to hear some experiences from the others. Okay. Now, yes, with the trade preference, I would say there's also some issues that, in my point of view, clients have been facing is regarding the automation, because still having a tool is one thing, but since it might be also time consuming, there needs to be a proper process in place. You also need a tool that is capable of automating. And I think based on the consultants that are building this trade preference, for example, with GTS, you can automate quite a lot. And with the addition for HANA, I think there's also room for improvement and discovery for a lot of consultants, because as I said, the SAP did a great job. Now it's rather a question of deep diving and trying to figure out what can you do with the current setup. Just to sum one, I think to me that was very confusing from SAP was the intercompany transfer of trade preference area, which typically had to be built with a development, but now they added this standardly with the addition for HANA, which is great. So you can also show this to your clients, because this is just usually a day-to-day flow. So yeah. Okay, then of course the end-to-end process usually is also an issue for clients. So that's why having a clear process from the inbound to the calculation to the outbound side and having all of that in one tool is great. And it can also show you this workflow without going to external systems and so on. Okay, and then lastly would be just the declarations itself. So you can dig into a GTS, check your declarations, run the annual report, and see all the preferences that were raised to your suppliers and then sent to your customers. Okay, as I said, with GTS you can tackle all the areas end to end. So on the inbound, you can automate quite significantly the request of LTVD, so long-term vendor declarations, and you can track them as well based on the origin determination. Then you can do calculation, which is based on your rules of origin that you or buy or set up manually. You can play as well with that setup, dependent on if you want to calculate it, for example, for different plants, plant specific, and so on. So that is, I would say, maybe interesting to also discuss if time allows us during the Q&A and have your thoughts about this. I can imagine that for some industries it's pretty significant. And then lastly, on the outbound side, to generate all the certificates and show your actual preferential treatment in your invoices and so on, and also automate here to have as less as possible non-compliance risks.
There's a lot of the automation as well that removes sort of the human element and doing it all manually, right? That's a time-saving bonus as well.
Correct. Yes.
I think there's a lot of focus on that now. Obviously, I'm sure everyone knows on this call that you can't escape Gen AI and things like this, and SAP would love to speak about that and how that sort of plays into Edition for HANA is slightly unclear, but I think this is sort of the start of making everything as automated as possible. And machine learning is a big topic for people like this as well. So I think the idea for a lot of clients is how do we free up as many man hours as possible by automating as much as we can, which obviously removes some form of human error as well. So if you can get the configuration done right, then it really is a massive advantage, isn't it?
That's correct, Jack. And actually, this is the slide that was focusing on the, let's say, the reducing the manual follow-up, because I think in the preference, I have seen some departments with quite some manpower that were doing this manually, which is, in my opinion, crazy work. And having a tool that automates quite a lot is indeed, I think, a benefit. Okay, then I think we can discuss now the, let's say, more towards the future. And let's say this, it's when SAP has some conferences, it's always very interesting to hear what they're working on. We can, of course, focus on what has been released, but we always hear sometimes during those conferences, what could be expected in next releases and so on. So we try to have a look at this as well. You might know as well, maybe more details about it. So please share, especially on this one, what you heard or what you have read on some blogs or articles. But I think we have seen with the cloud and the archiving capabilities that this is becoming more and more common to have everything electronically, let's say. So I would say that's the main one, and reducing paperwork, especially with all the political discussions of CO2, and that the industry, client has to reduce this annually. So it starts, I think, with your IT system. If you have to print all the transactions that are happening or occurring in the business.
A lot of talk as well around some of the carbon border adjustment things as well, the CBAMs. That's becoming a bit more of a big topic. I know obviously in general outside of GTS, the trend is towards net zero and things like this. So I think there's a lot of stuff surrounding, obviously the transit, the shipping, everything like this. You have to play that in. I don't know if you've had experience, Nabil, with doing things with the CBAMs before.
I just know like high level a bit, let's say as you said, what's coming. So you have to accommodate to these rules, but I think still it needs to be defined, or let's say finally decided by the commission what is allowed and what is not allowed. And then, but I know a lot of clients are actively looking at it currently, at the CBAM, and how to accommodate and which tool is the best to control this. But as you said, there's a lot of them, like also the EUDR, which is for the deforestation, which is also linked a bit to so here again, you can, by leveraging the electronic capabilities of an IT tool, you automatically reduce your carbon footprint.
Yeah, that was a big topic at the Global Trade and Tax Conference in Amsterdam. I think everyone was sort of pivoting towards more, like the deforestation thing and CBAMs. I think it's from an ESG perspective for client side and everything, GTS presents quite a nice opportunity to make that look a bit better and obviously trend towards net zero. So I think it's just another thing, right, where if you have everything done properly and you're compliant, then things are a lot easier for you in that sense as well.
Correct. Yeah, fully agree. And then I would say next would be another interesting future-proof advancement that we saw or heard is the machine learning models, I think especially in the classification process. So which is a process that every business has to go through and typically quite intensive. But it would be good that you, let's say, have already a preset of a proposition of a classification, and then that of course the business user has to validate that not the tool classifies it for you, but you have the final call. But at least that it's somehow simplified and that you don't have to go through one by one from scratch. So quite interesting, and let's see what SAP comes. I think a lot of consulting companies have worked on internal tools But yeah, the SAP is also looking at it themselves.
Yeah, it's another one that plays into the man hours and things like this as well. Just speeding up everything, right? If you have to do all of the classifications manually, right? Whereas the machine learning, I think the idea, obviously, as everyone will know, is it will learn from all of the automated classifications, and then everything just becomes quicker and less errors as well. So I think that's one of the more interesting things that I think has come out of sort of SAP in terms of, especially with Edition for HANA now, is all of the machine learning. And obviously, like we mentioned earlier, you can't escape AI and machine learning and things like this. But I think in this aspect, it's really going to help speed things up and make everyone's life a bit easier.
Exactly. And it would be good to see clearly from SAP, from this new edition for HANA, how they integrate it in next releases, because today in the current version, it's still not, I would say, to the extent of being smart by leveraging AI or machine learning, but I'm confident it will come in next releases one day. And then I think pretty nice one is also the embedded analytics. So SAP did also some improvements in some areas like the exports to show with the graphs from, let's say, a direct overview, what is blocked and for which area and so on. So that's pretty cool as well. AI, I think, at least from my understanding, I only heard rumors, but for example, some partnerships from SAP with AI companies, but to what extent they will include AI, I think that's a bit later in the future. But here again, let's see.
Yeah, I think when they were speaking at the conference regarding AI, it's a lot of things we're yet to see what sort of part it's going to play, and I think a lot of the stuff will be developed sort of by third-party partners and sort of attached onto GTS rather than directly embedded. But I think it will be interesting to see where they take it. Obviously, as I'm sure everyone knows, AI is still very at an early stage in terms of being able to help us out with GTS, but obviously I think they're doing a lot of work with the Microsoft Copilots and stuff in Azure. I think that was a big thing at SAP Sapphire, and also the Dual tool as well. So we'll see sort of how that takes shape in a more GTS specific way as time goes on. But I think it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
Yes. So interesting times ahead. Okay. Actually, I think we can, by that, already open up some of your questions and then see and interchange, because I saw as well in the chat that we have a couple of questions. So not sure how we want to proceed here, Jack. Should we?
Yeah, sure. Let's start from the top. I think Naga's had a question for a while since we started. So I think this is more based around when we were speaking about the sort of middlewares, Cboga and ProData. So Naga asks, does ProData also provide cloud-based solutions, and are they certified by SAP?
So yes, but so for ProData, actually, this is being, let's say, proposed only for Austria, as far as I'm aware. I did not hear or see that they provided other solutions to other countries for now, but they are indeed, let's say, provided solution as an intermediate partner from SAP, but only for Austria.
Is there a reason that it's only for Austria? Do you know?
I would say the capability, so the technology that is being used, because you need to map because for us, like GTS consultants, it's like a black box what these intermediate partner are actually doing or mapping with the customs. So the link from their system to customs authorities is always like a bit of a black box. We have an idea, of course, but really going into the details, that's the big question. But that's also their business. So knowing that, I would say, okay, then how they operate, right? So I think it's the difference comes because of the technology they use. I think Austria customs authorities has a different usage of this.
Okay, well, yeah, that makes enough sense. I know, obviously, I think Brazil's a big one where a lot of stuff is sort of different, especially in compliance, right? And not GTS out of the box is not a perfect fit sometimes, and I know a lot of clients use different solutions for that. I wondered if you had any sort of experience with the Brazilian stuff. The localization I know is very tough, but I'm not sure if you'd touched on it at all.
Yes, so on the Brazilian, actually, I also know a couple of clients that were using SAP GTS have been able to accommodate to the full requirements of the Brazilian authorities because they have the nota fiscale, which
Yeah,
is a bit special. But indeed, I think, and I saw as well on the releases from SAP that they're moving more towards a full solution.
yeah.
I think today that's not 100% the case, but we will be getting at that point. I think Brazilian business is increasing in the recent years, and that's why SAP is also focusing to provide a full end-to-end solution.
Yeah, I think so. I think they did mention this at the conference actually, and I think they've done a lot of this and sort of releases where they're trying to trend towards that direction where it can just be the one tool that fits everything for it, and you don't have to just carve out one country in your trade system to just be covered by something else. So I think that's it makes for a more harmonized product. Obviously, a lot of businesses, like you say, are active in Brazil, and I think it causes a bit of dysfunction having to jump onto something else or have a different provider for that. So I think it's definitely trending in the right direction. But yeah, I think that's an interesting point. So Nag, I hope that sort of answers your question around Pro Data and how they're set up to help. But yeah, so pretty much Austria for now. Leon asked, how frequently does SAP release updates for GTS? I imagine that might mean service packs or things like this as well.
Yes. So what SAP does, as you said, so they have service pack releases when it comes to, let's say, usually functionalities. So they release these. I don't know at what frequency, but for example, we have now with edition for HANA moving towards the service pack 4, and the service pack 5 is planned in somewhere towards the end of the year, like Q3, Q4 of 2025. But I could not tell if that is the same gap of frequency regarding the, let's say, the system releases. Now, if we are talking about updates that require legal changes, that depends if that legal change is known in advance. Then SAP releases a legal note mentioning that this is upcoming. If it's a change that had to happen politically very on short notice, then this could be released quite on a fast track, let's say, from SAP side.
Speaking of sort of when changes have to get released immediately, do you have any sort of interesting anecdote maybe of when sort of I know the Russian Ukraine war kicked off? I imagine there was probably quite a scramble to get things in place. Was do you have a sort of an experience with that? Almost overnight. Or?
I think well, yeah, of course, the Russian one with clients that had, for example, Russia as allowed end user business. But by putting Russia as an embargo, would that fix your control? I'm not sure, because it would block everything with Russia. And some transactions mean you have different business partners. It doesn't mean that it goes to Russia, but you are paying through, I don't know, Russian bank, but it goes actually physically to another country. So then these are like the specifics of a setup to be checked with your client. So I think Russia was an interesting one. Somehow maybe not so. Yeah, I mean, I think you can come up with a lot of solutions. I see as well. Naga said that they came up with a different approach for Russia sanctions. So I can accommodate to that indeed. So.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear maybe a little bit more on that from Naga. Actually, I think it's always interesting hearing how people have solved problems that everyone's facing, but done it just a bit differently. I think back to Leon's question just briefly with the frequency. I think it might be important to note actually the releases or versions of GTS specifically for Edition 4 HANA. Obviously, they had the first one, and now they're on 2023 is the release right or version that they're looking as the go-to right now, and then they'll go to 2025. But another thing that came out of the conference that was interesting is they're extending the sort of life cycle of the 2023 release, so that people can do co-deployments with S4 HANA. And there was a lot of talk about how those co-deployments are run, and people are finding it a little bit difficult when perhaps maybe most of your stuff is still ECC in terms of the wider SAP landscape, and then having to bring that across. So I think just in case anyone hadn't seen that, they're extending the life cycle, I think, of the 2023 release. Brilliant. Okay, and we have another one from Naga as well. This time about intercompany preference calculation. So he'd like to know maybe a little bit more about the standard product capability.
So of course we can deep dive more in details after the session, but just overall, I mean, this is a capability that has been added into the configuration of the Edition for HANA. So SAP allowed some config to be done, of course, with your feeder system. So dependent on if you would use like a purchase order to trigger this flow, and then GTS takes care of the interchange between these two on intercompany flow. But yeah, definitely we can discuss it offline as well.
Yeah, perfect. Leonard also asked, how does SAP GTS help businesses mitigate risks in global trade, such as the non-compliance or supply chain disruptions? I think maybe the interesting part to focus on that is maybe the supply chain disruptions. I know obviously, I think we've probably all had a fair few go lives when something goes wrong and there's business interruption. So I wondered maybe if you want to take that, Nabil.
Yes, sure. I think it's a bit, it depends on the setup of the client, meaning, so let's say you have a waterproof compliance IT, and the business person is centrally located and you do business globally. Then thinking about, okay, they probably perform European hours, for example, but what if US wakes up and there's a block and it needs to be checked by this team? Then you might have some disruptions indeed. So I think here it's a bit of sometimes what I saw was like having a global compliance team, and then there were some local entities that were even, for example, outsourced towards more compliance dedicated persons, like, I don't know, not lawyers, but people that have been studying all the laws and so, and then could actually determine for the client if it's a block or not. Now, usually when we discuss the supply chain disruption, there's a lot of processes. So there's, of course, the fact of not having proper data being transferred to, let's say, for example, GTS. So then we are talking about what we call technical blocks, which at the end also block your supply chain, but it doesn't mean that it's actually a real block. So then it should be checked if there was a proper setup, if something changed from the feeder system and that was not, let's say, communicated towards GTS. So first of all, I would say the configuration or the design should be clearly communicated back and forth. This can be progressive. And then additionally, of course, the details of it. So when we talked about the compliance, SAP GTS provides you flexibility. So you can use the SPL, the legal control, and the embargo. But if you experience a lot of disruptions, it would be good to have a look at these. For example, let's say we see a lot of what we saw currently SPL screening. Would be maybe interesting to understand why these are blocking. For example, master data seems to be very sensitive to lists that you are buying. So you can do, for example, an iteration to check a couple of examples and try to improve the system. But yeah, that let's say that decision to have a real-time check and blocking the supply chain, even there you can be flexible. So if you say, for example, on the purchasing side, this can not block at all. We cannot. This is not allowed because the time frame is too short. Of course, you can tweak the system in that ways and not really block the supply chain by itself.
Yeah, I think that's quite interesting. I think Leonard, I hope that sort of goes away a while to answer your question. There's another one from Emily I can see in the chat. So she says we updated to Seaburger Biz 6 alongside the change to the GB Customs Declaration Service system. They chose the on-site hosted solution, as once it was set up, they could support it themselves. It saves a lot of money rather than choosing the cloud solution. So that's an option to consider for any business. I think that's interesting. Do you have any experience doing something like that, Nabil?
Yes, indeed, and actually in both ways. So I think indeed, as Emily said, you save a lot of money with that version. So I think more and more, even SAP is proposing the cloud and the on-premise versions. Depending, you need to understand then based on what factors do they calculate the cost? Is it the number of users and so on, and then check as well the support, because here I think, as Emily said, the fact that you own, you pay less, of course, but you cannot really then have the support of Seaburger in all cases. So you would need to have like a purchase order with them to tackle your issue so that they can put someone on that ticket, and then they would take care of you. But if you have, of course, the knowledge in-house, then definitely this option that Emily just shared is indeed, to me, also just relevant. But I can imagine that some clients have no clue about specific checks to be done in-house when it comes to what Seaburger typically does for IDOC mappings and so on. Then maybe the cloud solution would be better suited.
Yeah, I think it's worth sort of noticing the shift. I think from SAP, where I think the focus is now very much more on cloud rather than on prem, and I think that's the way that everyone's trying to direct them, which makes it even more interesting that Emily, when you say that you can save a lot of money doing the on prem solution and on site hosted. So I think it's always a bit of a challenge trying to fight the tide that SAP is pushing. So I think that's quite interesting. And also with Seaburger, now you mentioned sort of when you have to have the PO and things like this to get the help and raise the ticket, it's always sort of frustrating when there's a slight delay, and especially if you're in sort of the middle of a go live, when you have to sort of take the time out and do all that. So I feel like if you can do everything sort of in-house, then that's great with an on-site hosted solution. But yeah, sometimes you can't always have the best of both worlds, can you?
Correct. Yeah.
Yeah, Emily makes a good follow-up point there. Completely depends on volume / type of business and what you can support. And I think volume as well does sort of play into a lot of the things we were talking about earlier with filing, broker filing, self-filing, e-filing, all of that stuff. Depends on what you want to pick based on your volume. But I think that's a good point. So I think we've kind of hit the end of sort of the Q&A, or at least the questions. If anyone has anything else they'd like to ask, feel free to put it in now, and we can get it while we still have some time. But if there's no other questions, then feel free to as well reach out if there is anything that comes up that you think maybe in the coming days you think you'd like some, even just to discuss about, or maybe some extra support. Feel free to reach out to me or Nabil at any point. More than happy to answer, whether that's over email or jump on Teams call. So yeah, I think other than that, that's pretty much time for us. Thank you everyone for joining, and especially Nabil for your insights. I think that was a really useful discussion and a good sort of overview of what they have coming up and some of the main features in GTS. So just as a reminder of Trillion, obviously for those who aren't familiar with us, sort of we elevate sort of the SAP capabilities of your system, specifically in this case GTS is what we're doing through sort of our network of vetted professionals, specifically freelancers. For example, Nabil. So I specialize in the GTS solutions, as well as him more from a project management perspective, but we do run sort of end-to-end project delivery as well. So but thank you everyone for coming. I appreciate you taking the time out. I know for you guys in Europe, this is during your lunch. So me and Nabil appreciate that greatly. We'll also be circulating a recording of the event in the coming days as well. So if there was anything that you thought was interesting or maybe you'd want to revisit, then feel free to do that in your own time. And we'll also circulate a PDF with the key talking points as well. So also you can give us a follow on LinkedIn, me and Nabil as well, just to stay in touch. Obviously GTS is a bit of a small world, but it's always nice to be connected with everyone. So that's it from me. I'm sure Nabil was appreciative of the time as well, and we'll be interested in speaking with you and catching up. And hopefully maybe we can make this a bit of a series, Nabil, where we speak through maybe some interesting things that drop for Edition 4 HANA and other topics.
That's correct. And thank you, Jack. Thank you, Trillian, for the invitation and for the guidance, and as well the audience for the interesting questions. But looking forward to the next steps.
Perfect. Thanks, guys. Take care and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.